history professor here at Lone Star College-Kingwood. And this is the final talk that we have in this semester in our Writers, Speakers, and Ideas series. And we're very pleased to have Judge Phyllis Frye here today. I want to preface this talk by saying that as long ago as 1863, Abraham Lincoln said that we're a country at Gettysburg, that we're a country that's dedicated to liberty, we're conceived in liberty, yet dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And that's always been a tension in America, this tension between liberty and equality. Or should it be a tension? I'm not going to intrude upon Phyllis's story today. I'm simply going to say, let's give a nice Lone Star welcome to Judge Phyllis Frye.
Thank you very much. As I alluded to, that may be difficult for some of y'all to see. If you decide that you want to get up and move, you won't hurt my feelings. How long do I have? An hour? Till 1 o'clock?
Yeah, about.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna rush through this so I'll have time for you to ask questions. First thing I want to do is I want to destroy stereotypes of what transgender people look like. I want to make sure that you understand that you will not know that a infant or a young child or a teenager or a young adult or an older person is transgendered until they themselves decide to come out to you, because socially the hurdle is so huge, is so vast that they just won't come out. And you're going to be surprised. And I'm hoping that when you see these pictures and see some of my background, that you will realize that the stereotypes don't fit. It's being recorded, and this PowerPoint is in the professor's computer. And if any of you want a copy of this flash drive, all you have to do is ask your professor. I've already given him permission to share it with you. He also has a PowerPoint. He also has a flash drive that contains most of what I've written or has been written about me in the last 40 years. It's about 1,700 pages of material. And so if you decide sometime during your stay here at the Lone Star College to write a paper and you need background information, you need historical information, you need something that goes back to the 70s and 80s that can be footnoted, well, it's there. And I've also asked him to share it with the library here and get it put on whatever digital you have. Okay, first off, what does a transgender baby look like? Or how is the brain wired? I assure you that sexual orientation and gender identity are hardwired in the brain very, very early. Now, why do I know this? Well, you got to admit, that is a beautiful little baby girl, don't you think so? Okay, that was me. And my parents didn't know I was a girl. They couldn't look inside my brain, so they did the usual thing, and they began to treat me as a boy and raise me as a boy. And as you can see, when I was 5 years old, there with my first dog, I assure you, I already knew something was different. Of course, this was in the early 50s. There was no such thing as the word transgender at the time. There wasn't even an organized LGBT community. About the only words that I ever heard about this was queer, faggot, and some other type of demeaning term. The reason why I'm walking between y'all is because I want you to, again, get the idea that I'm not infectious. This cannot be transmitted. You either are or you aren't. Okay. Here I am in third grade, about 9 years old. I assure you I was already cross-dressing secretly for about a year. Here I am in 1962. I am an Eagle Scout. And for those of you who are in the Scouts, You will know what God and Country Award is. You will know what the Order of the Arrow is. You'll know what a senior patrol leader is. And the reason why I show you that picture is to say, was I successful as a boy? Yes. Did I become a woman because I couldn't cut it as a girl? What do you think? I mean, as a boy, I couldn't cut it as a boy? I don't think so. 1966, I'm a senior in San Antonio, Jefferson High School. I was the ROTC cadet colonel. I led her 2 years on the rifle team. While I was in high school, I was in senior play. I graduated with an A+ average. And also while I was in high school, I spent a year on the yearbook staff and a year in the a cappella choir. Was I successful? Yes. I would rather have been in the pep squad or a cheerleader. Here I am at Texas A&M. At Texas A&M, when you're in the Corps, first year, they call you Fish. And people thought they were so smart and so funny, they'd say, oh, your name is Fish Frye, ha, ha, ha. Well, yeah, it was. I was there on a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship and a 1-year College of Engineering scholarship. And here I am in January 1970, a couple of weeks before I graduated, in only 3.5 years, with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and then I got orders by the Army to stay and get a mechanical engineering degree, which I did. Then I went on active duty, and I spent about 8 months on active duty before the military found out from my wife, who was leaving at the time, that I had the desire to be a woman, even though they had never seen me cross-dressed, nor had she. They spent the next 9 months trying to push me out and give me less than an honorable discharge. So, for a 4-year, all expenses paid scholarship and a regular Army commission, your parents and your grandparents as taxpayers got a mere 8 months of service out of me. What a waste of money that was. Okay, here I am in 1974 with my son by my first marriage. That was the 3rd time I had grown facial hair trying to be a guy. Obviously, it didn't work. Summer of 1980. This is a pride parade in Houston. I am out in the law school, and I'm founder of the group called Law Students Friends of Gays Asterisks. Gays Asterisks then was the term that I came up with because we didn't have LGBT as an inclusive term back then, and I wanted to make sure that it was inclusive. While I was in law school, I lobbied for 2 years and got the repeal of the Houston cross-dressing ordinance, which made me and other transgender people subject to arrest. I also did my 3L student internship in the district's attorney's office, and just before I graduated, I was successful in having the University of Houston place the Christian Legal Society on probation for discrimination in the way they treated me for 3 years. Okay, May of 1981. I graduated on a Saturday, and when I got home that afternoon, I got notice that I'd passed the bar exam, and so on Monday, I was sworn in. In 1989, I did the Donahue Show. I don't know if y'all remember the Donahue Show. You might ask your parents about the Donahue Show. It was a show about being disowned by families. This was 13 years after I transitioned. My family threw me away. I was hoping that if my family or extended family or neighbors of my family either saw the show or saw it in reruns, that they might say after 13 years, well, maybe she's not what we thought she was. Maybe we should look into chatting with her and see if she might be welcome back into the family. Well, it didn't happen, and my parents took it to their grave, and my older brother is still trying to think of a nice word since it's being videotaped. You'll have to fill in the blank, and so is my sister. Now, I practiced law for almost 40 years, not quite 40, 35 years. And most of that time, I was a criminal defense lawyer, and I learned early in my practice at Harris County that wearing a hat worked for me. One hot summer day, I wore a straw hat, And when you're used to being shunned or ostracized or, not really spoken to very much, and suddenly people say, oh, you look great in that hat. Well, when you get a compliment, what do? You take advantage of it. So I started wearing hats. You would probably do the same thing. And in the winter, of course, I got some other hats, and I learned from a friend of mine who just got elected to be the Harris County District Attorney, her name is Kim Ogg, that whenever the prosecutors would meet in their offices in the morning and go over what the docket was going to be that morning and what defendants were going to be there that morning and what attorneys represented those defendants that morning, if they saw that I was going to be there, they would say, oh, the hat's going to be there this morning. And man, I can think of a whole lot worse things to be called than the hat. So I'm glad that worked. I am known as being the grandmother, not of the transgender community, that belongs to someone else, but I am definitely the grandmother of the national transgender legal and political movement. And there I am addressing the second lobby days for transgender rights in Washington, D.C. The first one was in February of that year. There was all of 6 of us, and that was when we realized that we could pull this off, and so we did it. And there has been a transgender lobbying presence in Washington, D.C. every year since then, and about 14 years ago, a national organization was formed called the National Center for Transgender Equality, and they're there all the time. Now, sometimes I know you know that somebody takes a picture that you like. Well, I like that picture, so there it is. Here I am, shortly after I became the first out-of-the-closet transgender judge in the United States. I'm an associate municipal court judge for the city of Houston. That means that we hear mostly traffic courts. I'm an associate judge, meaning part-time on purpose, because if I was a full-time judge, I would not be allowed to practice law. And I have spent too many years working with transgender people, taking them through the courts, which you'll hear about later, that I did not want to give that up. And I've got 8 people in my law firm, and we do just about anything and everything. So I am an associate, but I am the first, and possibly in the world. I've been saying that now for 6 years, and no one has disputed me on the internet. And if people are going to dispute you, they're sure going to dispute you on the internet. You know that as well as I do. So anyway, there's that. Now, I'm going to take a little aside. If you'll notice these last 2 pictures, I was carrying a lot of weight. 4 years ago, I had to do something about it, and so I began watching my weight, working out religiously, weighing myself, and watching what I ate. And over 2 years, I lost 75 pounds. I went from 240 to 165. I went from a woman's size 22 to a 14 and a 44-inch waist down to a 32-inch waist. And I've kept it off for 2 years. Now that's something you might want to clap about. And on August 30th of last year, believe it or not, I was on the front page above the fold of the Sunday New York Times. Blew me away. I knew they were doing an article, and I knew it was going to be someplace, but I did not expect that. And if you ever want to read the article, you need only Google New York Times Phyllis Frye, and it'll come right up. Houston Chronicle has done a lot of nice stuff for me, and if you go to the Houston Chronicle website and put in my name, there's about 9 or 10 articles over the past decades that they have published, either of mine or about me. They've given me good ink. And actually, last year, I became a life member of the National Eagle Scout Association as Phyllis, 54 years after I became an Eagle Scout. So things are changing. And I'm hoping that this will destroy any stereotypes that you may have. Now, in order to understand non-discrimination law and policy with respect to the LGBTI, I for intersex, community, and I'm going to give you this short little thing because you may decide that your college needs to have in its policy a non-discrimination statement that prevents discrimination with respect to sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression. All three need to be included. Sexual orientation, who are you attracted to? Are you attracted to men? Are you attracted to women? Are you attracted to both? Are you attracted to neither? That's hardwired. Gender identity. Is your core mental personality more masculine? And if so, how far in the extreme, or more feminine? And if so, how far in the extreme, or neither? That's your gender identity. Gender expression is pretty much of a cultural thing because whether you're from the Mideast, the Far East, South America, no matter what your religion is, these are all different cultures that all express masculinity and femininity in a different way. But the reason why you need to include gender expression is because there are a lot of women who they may be straight, they may be gay, but they express themselves more in manly attire. The reason why we need to have gender expression in there is because if some employer says, I'm not firing you because you're a woman, I'm not firing you because you're gay, I'm not even going to fire you because you're transgendered, but I am going to fire you because you don't dress like a man should or you don't dress like a woman should. So all three need to be included. Okay, employment. What all has been going on in employment with respect to transgender? A lot. In 2012, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission voted unanimously that transgenders were now covered under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act with respect to complaints of sex discrimination in employment. Now, the EEOC is 5 commissioners, 3 are appointed by the party that holds the White House, and 2 are appointed by the party that doesn't hold the White House. I expect that may be changed sometime in the next 4 years, and it'll go away. That decision of 2012 was upheld this past year in a federal district court. This might also go away as the new president begins to appoint new federal judges. We don't know. Also covered under the EEOC in 2015 was sexual orientation. So lesbian, gay, bisexual people are now covered under sex discrimination of Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Could that change? Yes, it could change under the new administration. Education, bullying and harassment. It's my contention, and I think history will carry it out, that most protective law with respect to the LGBTI community that has come about or will come about deals with bullying and harassment. We've had too many kids who are bullied, cyberbullied, beaten up, threatened on school buses, whatever, who have taken their own lives over the past years or whose life has been taken. And so I expect that that is the basis of non-discrimination law with respect to education. And this past April, the United States Court of Appeals in the Fourth Circuit, which is Virginia, ruled that a transgender boy, that is, female to male, had the right to sue a school district on discrimination because the school wouldn't let him use the boys' bathroom, and that would be a violation of Title IX, which is the Title IX Education Act. That is going up before the Supreme Court this spring. I imagine that's going to be knocked down. In May of this year, there was a Dear Colleague letter sent from the U.S. Department of Justice which will be taken over by Jeff Sessions in the spring, and the U.S. Department of Education, which will be taken over by Betsy DeVos this spring. You can Google Transgender Department of Justice or Google Transgender Department of Education, and you will get this website. And it has the Dear Colleague letter, which went out to any school that gets federal funds. And basically what it said was it gave a clear definition of transgender. And no, I'm not going to tell you what that is. You can read it for yourself. And it opened all school resources, facilities, and activities to transgender students. This is the part that has everybody's underwear in a wad. Not allowing other people's discomfort to block transgender students' access or participation, but allowing alternatives for those who are in discomfort. What does that mean? Well, up until now, whenever a transgender child would transition, most of them transition if they are going to in college or high school, but I'm going to talk about high school. There are an increasing number that are transitioning in junior high and some that are transitioning now in elementary school. And what happens usually is the principal or the school district says you can use the restroom or the facilities in the nurse's office or in the office. And so especially for child in junior high and high school where the campuses are increasingly large, that means if a kid has to go to the bathroom, they have to think about it ahead of time. When they get their little 5 or 7 minutes or 10 minutes between classes, they have to run like hell to the nurse's office or the office, probably pass by at least 1 or 2 restrooms that they could otherwise use, and to use that one, which means that they're in the office or going to the nurse's office 3, 4, 5 times a day for no reason other than go to the restroom. Now, would you like to do that? Let me ask you, the next time you have to go to the restroom today, leave the building you're in, go pretty long distance to another building, and constantly use that same restroom day after day after day after day after day. You're gonna wet yourself, I promise you that. And after a while, people are gonna look at you funny because they're wondering why you're doing this. Okay, now here's all the Dear Colleague letter said. If someone is uncomfortable with a trans boy using the boys' restroom or a trans girl using the girls' restroom, and it's usually not a student, it's the student's parents, okay, the trans kid can still use the trans boy use the boys' restroom or facilities, trans girl use the girls' restroom or facilities, and that child or the parents of that child who are in discomfort, they're the ones that can go all the way across campus and use the office restroom or the nurse's restroom because that is a viable alternative. Now, you're going to ask me in just a second, what about trans girl going into the girls' locker room and exposing themselves or doing whatever? Well, for one thing, we don't do that to expose ourselves. And if some smart kid decided that he was going to take his mom's wig and push-up bra and skirt, put it in his backpack, go to school, in between classes, get together with some of his friends, ha ha ha, tee hee hee, silly little boy, put them on, run into the girls' restroom, and take pictures with his cell phone or unzip his fly and expose himself or masturbate himself or do anything else. All of these things that you're worried about are already against the law, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And as a juvenile, juveniles can be arrested. I think you already know that. Juveniles can be arrested. So anybody who wants to break the law is going to be arrested regardless of what this says. And it offers guidelines. It has another website that offers about 25 pages of things that have been worked out in the past with other school districts. It invites schools and school districts to come up with what works for them. And of course, you can Google ed.gov.ocr/LGBT or just Google this and it'll come up. I suggest that you use it if you are writing any papers. Also, The Transgender, the Texas Transgender Non-Discrimination Summit has had 8 annual conferences, and it's going to have its 9th one this next summer. There's their website. And what they do is they get together with high school and college students and parents of students and counselors and professors of students to try to come up with how to approach their school on non-discrimination policies with respect to sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. I suggest you go to their website and see all the wonderful policies that are already out there and available in Texas schools. Gender markers. That's what I do for a living. I told you I have 8 lawyers. 7 of them do the criminal and employment and divorce and wills and tax and all the other stuff that people do. The only thing I ever do anymore is I take transgender people to court and I get their names changed and I get their gender identity changed without the requirement of any surgery. And as you can see, I've been taking a lot of children lately. I've taken children as young as 6. Obviously, both parents, whether they're married or divorced, have to agree. And both parents, even if they are divorced because they love their children, have agreed. And I also take adults. I've taken adults into their 80s through court. Some of the ones that come to me who are in their 80s say, you know, my spouse is dead, my kids are grown, my grandkids are grown, I'm not going to live much longer, I'm going to be me for the rest of my life. And so usually what happens, and I tell everybody this, if you will come to my office and meet with me sometime during the first 3 weeks of any given month, if you can get all your stuff together, I can have you in front of a judge by the end of the month. I do this each and every month. Okay, other changes: health insurance, military service, housing, and shelters. Let me see what I put on here. Okay, insurance coverage. 2015, Office of Personnel Management. That's who issues the carrier letter for all the insurance plans for federal employees and retirees, said they could no longer exclude transgender-related care. I think that might stay because it's working with civil service. It's been going for a while, and a lot of insurance carriers are now starting to remove their blanket exclusions because of the fact that corporations around the United States, large corporations, are requiring it because they're coming on board with respect to the LGBTI community and their very valued employees. So I think that we might be able to keep that one. In 2016, earlier this year, there was a case that was in Brooklyn where a Medicare Advantage under AARP was told that they also had to provide those benefits. I don't know if that will stay or not. I kind of think we might keep the insurance stuff. I just don't think they're going to be changing that because there's so much other stuff that they might change. Military service. That just this past summer, the Department of Defense, under the Secretary of Defense, said that transgenders could now serve openly. I think that might also stay. I just have a feeling that that might also stay because the military has been coping for the last many years with respect to gay, lesbian people serving openly. And as you can see, when the SecDev passed it, the military said that the force of future needs required the best talent, and they know that they've been kicking out a lot of talented people like I would have been, right? Okay? There's minimal readiness impact, and it's a matter of principle. I don't think that one will disappear. It could, but I don't think it will. This one might, especially since I learned that Ben Carson is going to be appointed the head of HUD. I'm not saying anything political. I haven't yet said anything political. I've just been saying names and what I think might happen. In September of this year, HUD said to all providers that get federal money and that do shelter programs. They could no longer discriminate with respect to gender identity. What had been happening before that is trans women, it was mostly trans women, if they didn't pass all that well, they were excluded from women's shelters, and they were told, if you want shelter, you got to dress like a man and go to the men's shelters. They're not going to do that, and so they're homeless and out on the street. I think we may lose that. And there's more on it. Okay, public accommodations. Again, this goes back to the restrooms and the locker rooms, stuff like this. There was a recent ruling by the EEOC that restroom usage of pre or non-op transgenders was protected again under Title VII. I think that will probably go. The OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also has a similar ruling. I don't know if that will go or not because it deals with major corporations. It's in a different department. I think that's the Department of Labor. I don't know if that will go or not, but it's recent and it could go. And of course, we already went over the Fabian decision that's going up before the United States Supreme Court with the new Trump appointee. And I also discussed the Department of Education, Department of Justice letter that just came out this year. Right now, today, and up until the new president is sworn in and his cabinet and the new Congress begin to do whatever they're going to do, if you work for a company with 15 or more employees, you're protected under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and all schools and universities that receive federal funding under Title IX of the 1972 Education Act, transgenders are protected with respect to facilities use. Okay, what about city and state laws? As you know, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is making a big deal about this next legislative session in Austin. They're going to do everything they can to pass laws to keep transgender people out of the restrooms and locker rooms that don't match their birth sex or their biological sex. What that means is that they want me to use the guy's restroom. Guys, do y'all really want me in the restroom with y'all? I don't think so. Okay. Recently, as you know, if you live anywhere in Houston, last year there was the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance fight, and how that started. By the way, who's got a watch? What time is it? 12:30. Okay, I'm good. If you want to know how this started, the way it started is that on Washington Avenue, which runs just northwest of downtown, there's a whole bunch of nightclubs and other clubs where people, usually young people, like to go and dance and drink and party and all this other fun stuff. Several of the clubs were intentionally discriminating to keep African Americans out, or the number of African Americans kept to a minimum. And so their only recourse was to go to federal court and sue in federal court, which means a lot of money, a lot of time, several years duration. And so these people went to their city council member, and their city council member went to the mayor, who was Mayor Parker, who is the one that appointed me. And everybody wonders, how did Phyllis become a judge? Well, I played softball with the woman who became mayor many years later, and we knew each other. That's how I became a judge. It's all who you know. It's all politics, even if it's appointed. Okay. And so the mayor said, we need to have an inclusive policy. What they wanted to do was have a city ordinance so that if there was discrimination and some enforcement official, be it a police officer or someone else so deputized, could write a ticket. And the violator, accused violator, would either pay a fine or come to court and challenge either in a judge bench trial or a jury trial. And if they were found guilty, they would have to pay a fine. And that's it. It can be disposed of very quickly. And if you get enough tickets, you're going to quit doing this. So that's what the ordinance was all about, except the mayor said, let's include everybody. Well, of course, they included sexual orientation and gender identification. And the people in this town, or you're not in Houston, but, well, yeah, you are. The people who hate us decided that they didn't want sexual orientation and gender identification in this ordinance. And so what did they do? They stopped the ad campaign based solely on keeping men out of the women's restrooms and preventing some dirty old guy who was a former sex offender from going into the women's restroom saying, my gender identity today is the women's restroom, and following a little girl into the stall. You saw the ads. Didn't you see the ads? Okay, you saw the ads. Now, there were other ads that were pro-equal rights ordinance. And the people who handled the pro-equal rights ordinance, in my opinion, did a terrible job. Because, you know, when you watch television, you see part of a show, but then you see 5 or 6 commercials, and then you see some more of the show. There would be 5 or 6 commercial-style breaks. And in that break, there would be the bathroom ad, and there would be a ERO ad, pro-hero ad. You couldn't even tell they were talking about the same thing. You couldn't. It was horrible what they did. So let's talk about it. As you know, North Carolina is suffering a lot of economic discrimination from companies and corporations and other things that are pulling business out of the state. And other states, including Texas, are talking about passing similar laws. There's Dan Patrick, I already talked to you about. There's our indicted Attorney General who has already sued Department of Education, Department of Justice under the Dear Colleague letter. 11 other states joined. After the new president-elect was elected, there was an article in the Chronicle which says that Ken Paxton is no longer really interested in pushing the legal thing. He's going to push the lobbying thing because he knows other people that have their underwear in the wad are going to be in control of the works after the new president takes office. Okay, and there's on the other side a lot of stores, including Target, and I picked Target especially because Target stores are being targeted on this policy. But a lot of other stores and businesses have adopted a store-wide policy allowing transgender individuals to use the restrooms that match their gender expression. Okay, now, how should we fight this? In my opinion, and I've suggested to the new mayor and members of city council, and in lectures like this, that if they want to do the HERO ordinance again because it lost in the campaign, they have to make a very significant amendment or addition or rewrite of the ordinance. And in my opinion, if they will simply take the 1968 City of Houston Ordinance, Section 2820, which is entitled Entering Restrooms of the Opposite Sex. You didn't know the city had an ordinance to keep men out of the women's restroom, did you? No, it's been on the books since '68. And if they would simply take the previous HERO ordinance and make a subsection and entitle it Prohibition on Entering Restrooms of the Opposite Sex, and it would say Section 2820, Enter Restrooms of the Opposite Sex from 1968, will remain applicable, or some other language. So, what did the ordinance say? It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly, intentionally enter a public restroom designated for the exclusive use of the sex opposite of that person's sex without. Okay, so that pretty much covers everything that the ad campaign was about. But there's 2 additions. One is, without the permission of the owner, tenant, manager, lessee, or other person in charge of the premises. So that means if this university decides that they are going to pass an ordinance that prevents discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, and they decide that transgenders can use the restroom since they're the ones who have control over the property, then it's not a violation of the law. Suppose you work for a firm who owns a building. Suppose you go to a clothing store or some other store, or like the Target store. They are the owner, manager, lessee, whatever, and they give permission. So again, it's not breaking the law. What about a male janitor who's cleaning up the women's facility, or the women janitors cleaning up the men's facility? Obviously, again, they have permission. But here's the magic words with respect to transgender and with respect to that ad, that awful ad campaign. In a manner calculated to cause a disturbance. Transgender people don't use the restroom to cause a disturbance. We use the restroom to use the restroom. Any city that is about to go into a political fight about transgender individuals should adopt the City of Houston ordinance. Now, what about the people who want to cause a disturbance? What about the dirty old man in the ad campaign? What about what Dan Patrick has been on television and in the newspapers and on radio arguing about the fact that some dirty old man is going to go into the restroom and molest children? Well, first off, if you live in Houston, you're already in violation, just like I told you about the junior high kid or the elementary kid or the high school kid who puts his mother's stuff in the backpack and goes into the girls' restroom and starts doing all kinds of stuff. Well, he can be arrested as a juvenile, all right, and you can be kept in jail overnight. What about those who want to commit other sex crimes? Well, believe it or not, the Texas Penal Code, indecent exposure, is a Class B misdemeanor. It's already on the books. What about public lewdness? What if somebody decides to masturbate in the women's restroom? Guess what? It's a Class A misdemeanor. What about someone who wants to go into the women's restroom and peek in the little crack between the door and the wall, or stand on the toilet seat next door and look over? Well, guess what? If it's done against a child 14 years or younger, that's a felony. And what about video recording? Remember I told you about the kid who's going to go in there with his cell phone, who's going to take pictures of girls in the restroom, or goes in the locker room, is going to take pictures of girls undressing and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? That's a felony. And the dirty old man that was in the ad, he's looking at a felony. So what is all the noise about? Why are they wanting to create new laws when we already have more than enough laws to cover every single situation? Now, I've been suggesting to groups like PFLAG and Equality Texas and others that they might want to organize teams who are going to monitor certain television stations and certain radio stations, so that somebody is always watching or recording a certain radio station or television station, so that when these awful ads start coming on, they will be recorded and they will be logged in, so that if they lie like they did the last time, we will have evidence to go against them and their licenses with the Federal Communications Commission. I don't know if some people are going to do that or not, but I would think that a letter to the radio or television station's lawyer saying that's what we're going to do if you lie again, like you lied last time and you accepted money to run those ads, we're going to go after your license. I think they might be a little reticent to take it, or I think they might tell the people who are trying to buy the ad, you better change this. Okay, and for those who keep pushing to require transgender folks to use restrooms and locker rooms that matches their biological sex or their sex at birth, remember guys, I asked you, do you really want me in the restroom with you? Okay, here's who's going into the women's restroom. Now, do you want him in the women's restroom? This is Jameson Green. He's the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. He's a trans man. He's fully bearded and bald, and he's been out since 1991. Do you want this trans man in the women's restroom? This is an attorney in Washington, D.C., a friend of mine. He's been out since 1993. Do you want this bearded and balded man in the women's facilities? He's the staff attorney for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. He's been out since 1994. And what about this? Now, this is a handsome guy, you got to admit. He's F to M. Do you want him in the women's facilities? Well, that's what's going to happen if they pass these laws and require you to use the restroom that matches your biological sex or your sex at birth. So, any school district, university, private company, hotel, restaurant, whatever, if they will just follow the existing 1968 ordinance that is still on the books in the city of Houston, it will alleviate the problem of people worrying about people using the restroom or whatever of the opposite sex, but it won't hurt trans people because they've got to do it in a manner calculated to cause a disturbance. Now, why do I say it won't hurt transgender people? Well, in the early 1990s, the Houston Police Department and the Vice Squad decided that they were going to go after trans women who didn't pass very well and who were using women's restrooms. And so they started arresting a bunch of them. And I got a lot of phone calls. Well, again, it's a Class C misdemeanor. It's a fine-only offense, even though these trans women spent the night in jail, were strip searched, were photographed, were paraded up and down the halls of the men's jail facilities and otherwise humiliated. And they said, what can we do about it? And I said, you've got to go to trial because the judge can't dismiss it. The prosecutor's not going to dismiss it. The police aren't going to dismiss it. You have to go to a jury trial. And you're not going to hire me because the maximum fine is less than I would charge to go to a jury trial. It's less than anybody would charge to go to a jury trial. So here's what you do. On the day you're supposed to go to court, you dress up and go to court as your trans woman's self. And when your name is called, go up to the judge and say, Judge, I'm not guilty. Would you please set a jury trial date? And you'll get a jury trial date. And then when the jury trial comes up, you go again as your trans woman's self. And after the jury is selected and the prosecutor says what they're going to say and the police officer says what they're going to say, you get on the witness stand, raise your right hand and say, yes, I use the women's restroom because the ordinance addresses causing a disturbance. I felt I would cause more of a disturbance using the men's restroom. And not only that, when I went into the women's restroom, I went directly to the stall. I stepped in the stall, I locked the stall, I used the restroom, I unlocked the stall, I walked directly out. I did not stop at the mirror to primp or put on lipstick. I did not stop to wash my hands. I didn't do anything. I walked in, locked the door, went to the bathroom, and walked out. I did not do this in any manner calculated to cause disturbance. Not guilty jury, not guilty jury, not guilty jury, not guilty jury, not guilty jury. Prosecutors told the police to quit enforcing it against transgender people. This will not affect negatively the transgender community. Yeah, I don't know who I'm going to speak to at different times. Sometimes I'm speaking to HR groups. And you have my permission, okay. There's my website and there's my email address. If anyone wants to send me an email, please don't send me an ugly email. I get enough of those. But we now have time for questions. And when I went across the stage to get my law degree, I was fully expecting somebody, some group, some couple of people to make nasty comments or nasty sounds or something. It was dead silence. I walked across the stage just like everybody else and got my law degree. And that's because those of you came out of the closet that you're a nice person. Why can't you come out of the closet that you're a nice person?